Hello, my name is Katie Moore, and I am a historic archaeologist at a CRM firm, so Derek asked me to do a short presentation on metal artifacts. When analyzing metal, the first thing to do is sort them by groups. At my firm, we use the groups created by Stanley South, which you see on the screen. He splits artifacts into the kitchen group, the bone group, the architectural group, the furniture group, the arms group, the clothing group, the personal group, the tobacco pipe group, and the activities group. Separating your metal artifacts into these groups helps to determine what kind of site you have. For example, if you have metal from a bunch of different groups, you're more likely to have a house site as opposed to a site where somebody just dropped all their trash off. Trash sites are usually represented by just one group. Metal is recovered from almost all groups, but I will briefly touch on 4 of the more common groups recovered from sites: the kitchen group, the architectural group, the clothing group, and the activities group. Items recovered from the kitchen group are primarily metal utensils like forks, knives, and spoons, but you occasionally get items like the hand-pierced coffee tea strainer on the right. Most of these artifacts have to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, but many have defining characteristics that aid in their analysis. For example, the two-tined fork on the left was able to be dated to sometime between the late 1600s to the early 1800s. This was based on the fact that forks did not come into common use until the late 1600s and generally had 2 tines until the beginning of the 1800s. Also, though the hand-pierced coffee/tea strainer on the right wasn't necessarily datable, it provided some insight into the socio-economic status of the owner. It was collected from a feature with an overall date of early to mid-1800s. Though there were a fair amount of strainers on the market at this time, this strainer is handcrafted and quite crudely, indicating that the maker and user of the strainer either could not afford a pre-made strainer or had no access to one. Items recovered from the architectural group are primarily nails. Nails can be one of the most useful metal artifacts for dating a site because they changed over time, as you can see in this image. Until the last decade of the 1700s and the early 1800s, hand-wrought nails were used. They were made one by a blacksmith or nailer. They are not commonly recovered, but are distinguishable by their square shaft and hand-hammered head. Between the 1790s and the early 1800s, various machines were invented in the United States for making nails from bars of iron. These are what are referred to as your cut nails. Early versions of the cut nail were still hand-headed, but by circa 1810, the heads began being attached by machine. Throughout the early 20th century, nails quit being made of iron and started being made of wire. By 1930, 90% of the nails being used were wire nails. It's fairly easy to distinguish between cut nails and wire nails provided they aren't overly rusted and deteriorated. Cut nails, which you see on the left, are square-bodied and have a square head, while wire nails, which you see on the right, have a round body and a round head. It can be difficult to differentiate between the 2 types of cut nails if there is too much rust or deterioration, but the basic difference is that hand-headed nails taper below the head, whereas machine-headed nails do not. Another way you can analyze nails is by looking at their penny weight, which basically just means their size. The penny weight applies to both cut nails and wire nails. Different size nails were used for different types of construction. Smaller nails were used for things like attaching shingles and flooring, while larger nails were used for things like constructing the main frame of the house. By looking at the penny weight of the nails in your assemblage, you can better determine what kind of site you have. By that, I mean if you have a whole variety of nails, you're more likely to have a house site, whereas if you've just found one type or size of nail, you're more likely to have found a trash site. Most of the clothing group artifacts recovered are either buttons or buckles. These can be highly datable and typable. When analyzing clothing group items, especially buttons, determining what type of metal it is made of can aid in dating it. Buttons made from cuprous metals like brass gained popularity in the 1700s and remained popular throughout the 1800s. Buttons made from ferrous metals like iron were also popular throughout the 1800s, but saw peak popularity between 1800 and 1870. Though not always possible, determining the style of button can also help date and type it. For example, sew-through buttons like the one on the top left typically served more of a utilitarian function, being used to fasten clothing like work shirts and trousers. The material and the style of this button indicate that this button dates to the early to mid 1800s and likely belonged to someone of lower socioeconomic status. The same type of analysis can be conducted for the buttons on the bottom left. These two buttons are iron two-piece buttons with loop shanks on the back of the disc button. These types of buttons were less utilitarian and used for more decorative purposes, like on the outsides of jackets. Additionally, metal buttons with fancy decorative inlays like these were popular until the mid to late 1800s, when more subdued cloth-covered buttons gained popularity. Combining the material and the style, it can be deduced that this button dates to the early to mid 1800s and likely belonged to someone of a higher socioeconomic status. Buckles like those seen on the bottom right are not typically as datable as buttons, but can provide some information about the site. For example, the two buckles on the bottom right are fairly simple and utilitarian, which indicates that the wearer did not have a great deal of wealth. The activities group is a commonly collected group because it contains various metal implements like barbed wire, pieces of farming equipment, and horseshoes. As with the other groups, each artifact typically has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, especially the various farm equipment pieces. However, some items have general characteristics. For example, barbed wire can be useful because it changed styles over time, as you can see in this picture. However, the older stuff typically rusts in the southeast due to the climate, and it can be hard to determine style. Horseshoes can be diagnostic as the shape is fairly distinctive for different types of animals. As you can see on the left, a mule foot is straighter through the heel than a horse. This is an important distinction because it can help you to determine the activities at your site. And by that I mean where there is an abundance of mule shoes as opposed to horseshoe, there was some kind of farming happening at that location. In addition to determining activities, horseshoes can be useful in determining age. This is due to the fact that the style of horseshoe changed over time, as you can see in this image. So in summary, a wide array of metal artifacts can be found at archaeological sites and can give insight into the date of the site, the use of the site, and some information about the inhabitants of the site. Because of its wide variety and variability, analyzing metal artifacts isn't as standardized as analyzing glass or even ceramics, but it should not be dismissed as a valuable artifact. Often metal artifacts provide the most insight into the inhabitants' socioeconomic status and their general day-to-day activities. Thank you.